All right, welcome everyone. You ready to jump into another deep dive today?
Absolutely. Always excited to explore these fascinating topics.
Me too. And
Perfect.
today we're tackling something really interesting, a concept called Tongpin Gongxian.
Yeah, you might recognize it as sympathetic resonance, that
Mm,
idea of things kind of vibrating at the same frequency.
right, exactly. And we've got this text called Van Ban Duke Nan with insights from Benny Spirit, and it dives into from both a scientific and a Buddhist perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how this one principle shows up in such different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So our mission here isn't just to define the term. We want to really grasp how this works, look at it from all these different angles, and then ultimately see how it applies to our own lives.
Right. So we're not just going to be talking about bridges collapsing or something.
No, no. Although that's part of it. We'll definitely get there. We'll get there.
That's right.
But there's a much deeper kind of personal dimension to this whole idea.
Absolutely.
So I think a good place to start is with some real world examples.
Okay, perfect.
Stuff we can actually see this principle in action. And one of the most famous examples is that Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse.
Oh, yeah, back in 1940.
Yeah, that was a wild one.
Wild, that one.
Relatively light wind, blowing at just the right frequency, and it caused the bridge to oscillate like crazy.
Tension turn.
Yeah, and eventually just buckle and collapse.
Unbelievable, yeah.
Imagine like a gentle breeze bringing down this massive structure. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah, it really speaks to that idea that even something small, if it hits the right frequency, the right vulnerability,
Yeah.
can have a huge impact.
Yeah, a really profound lesson there. And it's not just bridges, right? Our source material even mentions tall buildings collapsing while other buildings nearby are totally fine.
Mm.
Initially people might have thought bad design or shoddy construction, but sometimes the culprit turned out to be resonance, some kind of external vibration hitting at just the right frequency for that specific building.
Right.
And that vibration just kept getting amplified
Yeah.
until, boom, the whole thing came down.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you think, right? Like, what are the things in our lives that might be susceptible to that same kind of effect?
That's a great question. And that's kind of where we're going with this. Because this principle of things vibrating in sync, it's not just about destruction.
No, absolutely.
It's not always a negative thing.
Right. We even use resonance intentionally, like with technology and stuff.
Exactly. So, everything has its own inherent rhythm.
Okay.
And when those rhythms line up, either things can get really synchronized or really out of whack, but it can also be harnessed, like you said, for good.
Well, think about sound waves. Think about energy waves, even microwaves.
Microwaves. Our source mentions that.
Yeah. So they work by basically emitting microwaves at a certain frequency, and it causes water molecules in the food to vibrate,
Yeah.
generating heat and cooking the food. But not everything reacts to microwaves this way. It has to be the right frequency for that specific material to create that resonance.
Right. So that's how we use it in technology in a way that, helps us.
Okay, so we've seen how resonance works in the physical world.
Exactly.
So now I'm kind of curious, how does the Buddhist perspective approach this concept of?
Yeah, let's shift gears a little bit and dive into that. Because our source material brings it up in relation to vows,
Vows, okay.
those deep aspirations to help all beings. And also this practice of reciting the Buddha's name, Nian Fo Yi Fo.
All right.
So the basic idea is that by consistently reciting the Buddha's name, it's like you create a kind of vibrational match, a resonance with the Buddha.
Yeah, I can see that.
And over time, by maintaining that resonance, you allow the Buddha's vows, those vows, to help beings, to become more active, more present in your own life. It's like tuning a radio dial.
So it's not about just saying the name once or twice.
No.
It's about consistently aligning yourself.
It's about that consistent, effort.
Okay.
Our source even brings in the Paisagura Sutra.
Oh, the Medicine Buddha Sutra.
Yes, the Medicine Buddha Sutra, which says that if you hear the name of the Medicine Buddha and you make the commitment to stop doing harmful things and cultivate good ones,
Okay.
then you can receive the benefits of his powerful vows. But there's a catch, right? There's this important condition.
What's that?
You need to one extinction, cease evil, and practice good. So why is that so important when we're talking about resonance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, why this emphasis on ethical conduct? It seems like there's a deeper connection here.
Well, our source uses this really interesting analogy comparing our mind to an operating system on a computer
Yeah.
and negative thoughts and actions. Himino, as you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are kind of like virus software,
Oh,
right?
okay.
If your system's full of viruses, it can't run properly.
Right. It gets slow and crashes and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So similarly, our mind, if it's full of negativity, it's really hard to focus. And it becomes difficult to connect with those positive energies, the Buddha's vows.
So it's like trying to tune into that radio station with a bunch of static.
Exactly.
Okay.
All that static. And so the uncontrolled six senses.
Nukin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially the mind itself.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
those are like the worst offenders, the most disruptive virus software.
So basically, ethical conduct, it's not just some arbitrary rule.
No, not at all.
It's like essential system maintenance.
It's like clearing out the mental clutter, making space for that resonance to even happen. A computer can't run new software if it's totally bogged down with viruses.
Right.
And a mind full of negativity can't properly install those benefits of the Buddha's vows.
Okay, so it's about creating the right conditions for this to even work.
Exactly. And so that's why Urya is so essential, because without it, our mind is constantly being pulled in different directions.
By all those random thoughts.
Yeah, random thoughts and those delusional thoughts always popping up. And that makes it almost impossible to maintain a consistent frequency for resonance.
Right. Okay, so how do we actually cultivate that right frequency? How do we move away from all that noise?
Well, our source talks about avoiding being pulled away by those random thoughts.
Okay.
Right. And it connects this idea to the 10 wholesome deeds, Shishan.
Oh, okay, the 10 wholesome deeds. So how does that tie in with resonance?
Well, for example, not being greedy.
Oh, Bhutan.
Right. This leads to it leads to the purification of the 3 karmas.
Oh, Sanya Kunjing.
Yeah, especially the karma of our intentions,
Yeah, Kunjing.
Yes. When our mind isn't always grasping and desiring things, it becomes more stable, less agitated.
Okay, so it's like each of these deeds is a way to clean up a different kind of mental static.
Exactly. Allowing our inner receiver, so to speak, to tune in more clearly.
Right.
And then there's not engaging in improper sexual conduct.
We knew.
Yeah. And this is linked to the harmonious regulation of all 6 senses. Yeah. But particularly the ability to control the mind. The source really emphasizes this idea of controlling the mind. It's like a focused and controlled mind is crucial for aligning our own frequency with the Buddhas.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense, because if your mind is all over the place, how can you resonate with anything?
Exactly. And the source also points out that constantly chasing after Fandhya, those afflictions, that leads to the 6 senses going haywire.
Yeah.
Which makes it hard to meditate and connect.
Yeah, it's like a vicious cycle. Uncontrolled senses feed those afflictions, and then those afflictions make it even harder to focus.
Absolutely. Now, I love this analogy our source uses about the downloading and installing of benefits. Can you walk us through that? It sounds like a key point.
Yeah. So remember the pendulum example, how things tend towards a shared rhythm.
Right.
Initially, our mind might be like that pendulum, just swinging wildly, full of chaotic thoughts.
Okay.
But through consistent practice, ethical conduct, we gradually start to synchronize with the Buddha's frequency.
Right.
And once we achieve that resonance, it's like we start downloading the Buddha's energy, his wisdom and compassion. But we don't just get it instantly. It has to be installed through further practice.
Oh, okay.
And then gradually it becomes a part of us, like an inherent ability.
So it's not like a quick fix. It's a process.
Right. And this is considered fundamental to spiritual growth.
Yeah.
Like you need to have the capacity for generosity before you can really give.
Okay.
Or the foundation of discipline before you can fully embrace ethics.
Right. That makes sense.
Okay. Now, underpinning all of this, the source says, is yin right view. Right view.
Why is that so crucial, do you think?
Well, our source really stresses that Yi is the foundation of everything. Like if you have incorrect views, yeah, then you're basically headed in the wrong direction. You're not going to get where you want to go.
So it's like if your foundation is off, the whole structure is unstable.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is where the importance of Yi comes in.
Extensive learning.
Yeah. Exposing yourself to wisdom, to teachings, and also Shanxiao Yile, cultivating a positive mental attitude.
Oh, interesting.
So it's not just about intellectual understanding. It's also about developing the right mindset.
Okay, that makes sense. And here's another really cool point. The Source actually presents as a kind of shortcut, or maybe a more effortless way to purify negative karma
Oh, okay.
through this effect of resonance.
Interesting.
So it's not about magically erasing our past actions, but tapping into a powerful force that's already there, working towards purification.
Right. And that's where bodhisattvas like Samantabhadra come in.
Samantabhadra.
Right. So the Source emphasizes that this power of repentance, it's not just our individual effort.
Okay.
It involves these incredibly compassionate beings, these bodhisattvas, who have dedicated themselves to helping all beings.
So many people even take the name Jay.
Yeah, as a way to embody that commitment to being a force for positive change in the world.
Yeah, like aligning with that intention.
Absolutely.
So they're constantly working to help us purify, to connect us with that power of repentance. But as we've been discussing, it's not a one-way street.
No, we have to do our part.
Our Source even addresses you, the listener, directly, saying you need to be able to generate that resonance.
Oh, okay.
To connect with their efforts. So how do we actually connect?
The DJ, right.
Yeah, how do we connect with this amazing force?
Well, the key, as we've already touched upon, is purifying the three karmas.
Body, speech, and mind.
Body, speech, and mind. And our Source specifically mentions the 10 Wholesome Deed Sutra.
Okay, the 10 Wholesome Deed Sutra. Chu Shan Ye Dao Jing.
Yeah, that's like the bedrock of all Buddhist teachings.
The foundation.
Exactly. Without that foundation, other spiritual practices, they're not going to be as effective.
Right, it all builds upon that. So we understand the importance of the 10 wholesome deeds.
Right.
The question is, how do we really cultivate them? How do we speed up that process?
Well, the Source says the key is Shua, right view.
Right view.
Without that clear understanding of reality, it's going to take a lot longer. Like, it gives the example of relying on the medicine Buddha. That can lead to achieving the 10 wholesome deeds, which then leads to stronger and Zhenjin diligence.
Okay.
So it's all connected, you know?
Yeah, all interwoven. And to maintain that resonance, that connection, we need focus, right? The Source uses this great image of a jumping monkey to describe the mind that's just all over the place.
Yeah, constantly jumping between thoughts, different mental frequencies, and that obviously prevents any real resonance.
Right. It can't settle on anything.
Exactly. So once we achieve that initial tongpin, that same frequency, we need tongbu.
Synchronization.
Right. A more complete synchronization. That's when the power of repentance really kicks in. And that, again, highlights the importance of really sticking to the 10 wholesome deeds. You know, starting with that solid you, so we're not always getting pulled away by all these distractions.
Right, so we're not feeding the monkey.
Exactly. And our Source even brings up the sutra of the Buddha's last teaching.
Yi Jiao Jing.
Yes, and it uses the analogy of like a poisonous snake in your room.
Oh, wow.
You know, to emphasize the danger of ignoring those harmful mental states.
So we need to be vigilant. Recognize those snakes when they show up.
Absolutely. And with right view, we can start to see these poisonous snakes of our minds.
Greed, anger, delusion.
Ton greed, ton anger. And greed, chant anger, and greed. For what they are, harmful.
Yeah. And that recognition, that's the first step.
To shuli.
Relinquishing them.
Letting them go. The Source compares them to like a poisonous snake's fangs. You wouldn't want to get bitten by that, right?
No, definitely not.
So by consciously choosing not to align with busui, those saya, those afflictions, we gradually weaken and eventually cut off that connection.
That resonance.
Exactly. And you know, it's interesting. The Source even points out that even those saya that we might think are enjoyable or pleasurable, they actually don't last very long when we stop feeding them.
Oh, that's interesting.
When we stop giving them our energy.
So they only have power over us as long as we engage with them.
Exactly. So once we start to see these afflictions for what they are, what's the next step in terms of moving away from those negative frequencies and intentionally connecting with more positive ones?
Okay, well, our Source says that Maikai is key here because it helps us recognize those negative connections. And then, once those connections start to weaken, we can intentionally align ourselves with the frequency of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas.
Right.
And if we can achieve that resonance, we can start downloading their wisdom and compassion. Like Samantabhadra's power of repentance. It's there, working for the benefit of all beings, even those who might not be aware of it yet.
So all of this sounds incredible, but is it actually possible? Is it something we can actually achieve in our daily lives?
That's a great question, and the source is adamant that it is. It uses the example of people who find physical prostration difficult,
Okay.
and it highlights the ongoing efforts of bodhisattvas, like Samantabhadra.
The eldest son of all Buddhas.
Yes, constantly working to benefit all practitioners. So we're not doing this alone.
Okay.
There's this incredible support system already in place.
Yeah.
We just need to tap into it.
Okay. So how does all of this relate to different Buddhist practices? Like reciting the names of Buddhas and bodhisattvas versus reciting mantras.
Well, the source explains that reciting the names of Buddhas and bodhisattvas relies primarily on their vows.
Okay.
That's what we connect with. Whereas reciting mantras taps into the inherent power of the mantra itself.
Exactly.
Exactly. And while mantra recitation does involve specific sound frequencies, relying on the transformative power of Buddhas and bodhisattvas, that goes back to calm.
Right. So it's about aligning with their energy.
Yes, aligning with that boundless compassion and wisdom. And this also helps to explain why you often see the phrase, good men and good women, in Buddhist scriptures.
Oh, interesting.
It's not just a gender thing. It points to a certain level of mental discipline and ethical conduct that's necessary for that resonance to work.
Oh, okay.
And speaking of boundless compassion and wisdom, we can't forget about Samantabhadra's capacity to help us purify. It's truly immense, isn't it?
Absolutely. Our source makes it clear that the collective power of bodhisattvas, led by Samantabhadra, is more than enough to benefit every single being.
Okay.
The key is, again, whether we can reach that state of resonance.
So it all comes back to that.
It does.
What about physical postures? Like, the lotus position U, Juafui.
Oh, right. How do those fit in with this idea of resonance?
Well, our source explains that those postures, kind of like mantras, can help to clear obstacles and cultivate positive merit. And different postures do have subtle frequencies, I guess you could say,
Okay.
that can resonate with specific practices, like certain hand mudras can help us uphold ethical precepts
Oh, right.
or deepen our concentration. And often the initial stages of practice, it's about focusing on one aspect, body, speech, or mind, before integrating them all for a more powerful effect.
Okay, so it's a gradual process of refinement.
Yeah, building that foundation.
Hmm.
So for someone listening who genuinely wants to change, who's looking for a way out of suffering, the vows of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas offer a real path. But achieving Troll, that's the key to tapping into that power.
Okay, so how do we even start to achieve that? Especially if, we haven't fully cultivated goodness yet.
Well, the source uses this analogy about guiding artificial intelligence. You can give it instructions and get a temporary response. But without that underlying understanding, that deeper goodness, the control is always going to be superficial.
Oh, right. It's just following orders without any real comprehension.
Exactly. So it's about establishing that foundation of right view and purifying those three karmas.
Okay, so how do we actually begin that process effectively?
Well, mastering the 10 wholesome deeds, starting with a clear understanding of each, that's crucial.
Okay.
And with a strong B, we can start to see those delusional thoughts for what they are, just illusions, deceptions.
Right, and without any real benefit.
Exactly. So we need to keep reminding ourselves of that. It's about that constant self-reflection.
Right.
And the more we recognize that those thoughts are just deceptive, the more we can detach from them.
Okay, so we stop feeding them.
Yes. And if we consistently don't engage with those dunny, that connection, that resonance with their negativity starts to break down. Because those thoughts, they primarily manifest through our intentions.
Intentional karma.
Right. It's amazing how all of this, these seemingly abstract concepts can play out in our everyday lives. Our source even gives some really relatable examples of how can lead to mistakes or even accidents.
Oh, like what?
Like, making mistakes while cooking or doing something embarrassing because you weren't paying attention.
Oh, right. I've definitely been there.
It happens to the best of us. But it really shows how powerful those ingrained habits can be and how important mindful awareness is.
Yeah, absolutely. And even our sense of what's good and bad, that's often just based on our habits.
Our conditioning.
Right, yeah.
Like the source gives this example of really spicy Sichuan food.
Okay.
Locals think it's delicious, but someone who's not used to it might find it unbearable.
Right, so good and bad are often subjective.
Exactly. And when we cling to those conditioned preferences, we create suffering for ourselves. Like, overeating certain foods just because we think they're good.
Oh, right. I see what you mean.
And the source contrasts that with the health of those who might not have an abundance of food.
Yeah.
It really makes you question our ideas of what's good and bad.
Yeah, it really puts things into perspective.
And it's not just food. It's also sensory experiences, like, maybe disliking a certain vegetable because you haven't grown up eating it.
Okay.
What we perceive as valuable or nutritious, it's so often shaped by our culture and upbringing.
Right. So it's all relative in a way.
It is. And when we attach to those preferences, it just leads to more negative emotions.
Okay, so how do we break free from that?
Well, it all goes back to right view. Those wrong views we hold, they're based on that negative conditioning.
Oh, okay.
And establishing right view, that's what allows us to break through that, to purify our body, speech, and mind. And that's what ultimately enables.
So I'm curious, how is this different from, say, generating merit and virtue through practices like reciting mantras, where we're relying on our own efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's about recognizing the difference between self-generated merit and aligning with the frequency of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Like diligently reciting mantras and cultivating right view, those are ways of generating our own merit.
Okay.
But intentionally aligning ourselves with those enlightened beings, that's a different approach. And police is what allows us to overcome those negative mental states. Greed, anger, delusion. Yeah. And that leads to ethical conduct, to not killing, stealing, and so on. It allows the 10 wholesome deeds to really flourish.
Okay. And with purified 3 karmas and well-controlled 6 senses, especially the mind, then what?
Well, the source actually talks about Shariputra, one of the Buddha's main disciples,
Okay.
who was known for having incredible mental abilities.
Oh, right.
So it's like those purified karmas and controlled senses, they create the conditions for these extraordinary capacities to emerge.
Interesting.
Now, the source also mentions this concept of completeness, juzu, of the 6 senses. It's not just about having them. It's about how developed they are.
Right. So it's not just quantity, it's quality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it uses this really interesting analogy to artificial intelligence.
Oh, okay.
Like with AI, you have perfect memory, super fast processing, the ability to learn massive amounts of information quickly.
Right.
So the source suggests that completeness in this context refers to a level of functionality like that. And with that kind of completeness resonating with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, it becomes effortless.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It is. And then the source even goes on to talk about resonance in Buddhist cosmology.
Oh, wow.
Referencing the Surangama Sutra. And it talks about light particle resonance.
Yeah.
Guanglizgongsen. It uses the example of Buddhas bestowing blessings upon other Buddhas and that light returning. And this kind of resonance, it goes beyond just sound or microwaves. It's like it transcends wave states altogether because of the accumulation of those vows.
Okay, so it's like a higher level of resonance fueled by compassion.
Exactly. But to achieve that, we need to purify our 6 senses and accumulate merit.
Right.
But the good news is, achieving that functional completeness, at least to a degree, maybe like those AI capabilities, that's presented as a real possibility.
Okay.
Through practice. And with that, learning and mastery becomes so much easier.
It's an inspiring thought.
It is. So to kind of wrap up our deep dive into Brahma, we've seen how this principle works in the physical world, from collapsing bridges to how we heat our food.
Right.
And we've explored how it operates in the spiritual realm, providing a powerful way to connect with those incredible vows of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And those 2 key elements, ethical conduct and right view, those are the foundation for establishing that resonance, clearing out that inner noise and allowing us to align our own frequency with theirs. And that alignment can lead to such incredible growth and positive change.
It's about recognizing the power of our inner state and how that influences our ability to connect with those higher levels of wisdom and compassion.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, consider the frequencies you're aligning with in your thoughts and your actions, even in the environment you surround yourself with. Are they building you up? Or are they creating more instability? What small shift in your own frequency could you make today to start creating a more powerful resonance for positive transformation in your life?
It's a great question to ponder.
It is. And thanks for joining us for this deep dive.